There's a church my parents attend, a church with a history that hovers over it like a specter, a history that has seeped into its very walls. This church wasn't always a sanctuary for the faithful. In the early 20th century, it served as a hospital, a last refuge for those afflicted with the dreaded scourge of tuberculosis. The echoes of their desperate prayers for salvation still linger in the air, a haunting reminder of the building's former life. As the decades passed, the hospital closed its doors, but the building found a new purpose. It became a nursing home, a place for the old and infirm to live out their twilight years. The laughter, the tears, the whispered stories of lives well lived, all have added layers to the rich tapestry of the building's history. Every Easter, I accompany my parents to this church. The building, with its high ceilings and hushed silence, always gives off an eerie vibe. It's as if the past refuses to be forgotten, its spectral inhabitants unwilling to vacate the premises. I've always been sensitive to these vibes, these unseen energies that seem to permeate the very stone and mortar. Each visit feels like stepping into a time capsule, a snapshot of eras long gone, but not quite forgotten. The church is a constant reminder that places, like people, have memories. They remember the joys, the sorrows, the hopes, and the fears of those who have walked their halls. And this church, with its long and colorful history, has many memories to share. From the corner of my eye, I often catch fleeting glimpses of movement, shadows that dance and play in the dim light, whispers that echo down the long corridors. I can't help but feel that we're not alone, that the building is more than just bricks and mortar. Every visit, it's like the building has a life of its own, whispering secrets of its past. One weekend, my mom decided to volunteer. She was to clean the toys in the nursery, and she brought along my nephew. Now picture this, a room filled with toys of every shape, size, and color. My mom, armed with disinfectant and a cloth, is on a mission to sanitize each one. My nephew, a curious 5-year-old, is her sidekick for the day, exploring the nursery with wide-eyed wonder. The nursery was a room of innocence and joy, but it was juxtaposed against the eerie, silent hallway that extended beyond the open door. The hallway, with its dimmed lights and long shadows, seemed to be a portal to the building's dark past. As my mom meticulously cleaned, my nephew, with his favorite toy car in hand, kept glancing nervously down that foreboding hallway. His eyes held a mixture of curiosity and fear, as if he was seeing something beyond the comprehension of his tender years. He would whisper to my mom, his words punctuated with trembles, "There's a creepy man in the hall, Grandma." My mom, not one to be easily spooked, would reassure him and check the hallway, finding it as empty and quiet as before. However, this wasn't a one-time occurrence. Several times throughout their time in the nursery, my nephew would insist on the presence of this creepy man. Each time, my mom would check, and each time, she would find nothing. Yet, my nephew's insistence didn't wane, and neither did his fear. And then came the breaking point. My nephew, his small frame shaking, begged my mom to leave. "I'm scared, Grandma," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes, usually full of joy and mischief, were now filled with terror. My nephew, scared, pleaded with my mom to leave. The building had unsettled him. The toys, once a source of amusement, now lay forgotten as they made their hasty exit. The echoes of their hurried footsteps seemed only to emphasize the chilling silence that enveloped the building. My mom, intrigued and concerned, decided to investigate this creepy man that my nephew had seen. She left the nursery, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The air was heavy, filled with an unexplainable sense of dread. She looked around, her eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone. No creepy man lurking in the shadows. She returned to the nursery, her heart pounding in her chest. But my nephew was insistent. "He's there, Grandma," he said, his small voice trembling with fear. My mom, not one to dismiss the imaginative mind of a child so easily, decided to check again. This time, she moved down the hallway more slowly, her ears straining for any sound out of place. She peered into each room she passed, her eyes searching the darkness for any movement. But still, there was nothing. No one. She returned to my nephew, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. She tried to reassure him, to calm his fears, but the look of terror in his eyes was unwavering. "He's still there, Grandma," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. My mom checked the hallway one more time, her heart heavy with an unsettling feeling of unease. She looked under tables, behind doors, even in the closets, but it was all in vain. There was no one there, no creepy man. She returned to my nephew, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and concern. "There's no one there, honey," she said, her voice gentle and soothing. But my nephew, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear, was not so easily convinced. "He's there, Grandma," he insisted, his voice firm despite his obvious fright. "He's there, and he's watching us." No matter how many times she checked, there was no one there. Yet, my nephew was adamant. He had seen a man. On their way out, my mom spotted a figure in the distance. It was a man from the church, a familiar face. He was working outside, his hands covered in dust and traces of paint, evidence of the maintenance work he tirelessly performed. This man, let's call him John, was a bit of an enigma. Often, he was the only one in the church when the congregation had long since gone home. His solitary figure could be seen moving through the halls, repairing, cleaning, maintaining. John had a unique role within the church, one that required him to be alone in this building of history and whispered tales. His presence was often the only sign of life in the otherwise empty and silent structure. Yet, he never seemed bothered by the solitude or the eerie atmosphere that seemed to cling to the church like a second skin. Spotting him that day, my mom decided to approach him. She needed to confirm something, to dispel the unease that had settled in her heart. She asked John if he had been inside the church earlier, perhaps seen a little boy playing in the nursery. His answer was a simple shake of his head and a straightforward no. There was a certain finality to his words, a clear indication that he had been outside all along, immersed in his work. This left my mom with more questions than answers. If it wasn't John, then who had her grandson seen in the hallway? She felt a chill creep up her spine, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. The church, in its silent grandeur, seemed to close in on her, its secrets hidden within the stone walls and age-old architecture. Trying to shake off the unease, my mom decided to joke about the situation. She laughed, a bit nervously, and said to John, "I guess my grandson saw a ghost then." She expected a chuckle, a dismissal, a shared amusement. But what she got was something entirely different. The man stopped working. He turned to my mom, a serious look on his face. The usual humdrum of his work had ceased, and an eerie silence fell over the church grounds. His eyes, normally filled with warmth and cheer, had taken on a different hue. A chilling, icy blue stared back at my mom, who stood frozen in apprehension. He looked away, his gaze lost in the distance, as if remembering something from a bygone era. The wind rustled through the leaves, the only sound breaking the eerie silence. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a mere whisper, yet carried with it a weight that seemed to hang in the air, pressing down on my mom's heart. "You know, I've been doing maintenance work here for quite some time now," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen things that I can't quite explain." His gaze turned back to my mom, a certain sense of resignation in his eyes. "I thought I was the only one, but it seems your grandson sees them too." A chill ran down my mom's spine. She could feel the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. She tried to laugh it off, to dismiss the creeping fear that was slowly taking hold of her. But the man's next words froze her to the spot. His voice was a mere echo, a chilling whisper that seemed to reverberate through the empty church grounds. He stared at my mom, his eyes locking onto hers as he uttered the words that would haunt her for days to come. "Which one?" he asked, his voice echoing in the empty church grounds. The question hung in the air, a chilling reminder of the church's dark past. It was a question that left my mom and all of us in shock, pondering the possibility of the unseen lurking in the shadows of the church.